Wow, we've got 83 participants.
There are many people in the waiting room here.
Yeah, we're trying to get them in. Yeah, about 250 people have signed up.
Anyway, just a rule for the next 2 hours. Please turn off your cell phones. Please also mute. If your bandwidth is low, please also stop your videos. So that way you can hear much more clearly. On that note, I think Suprabha should start.
Leo, do you want to begin with some housekeeping and anything else?
So I think, again, welcome all, and thank you, Antonio, and thank you, Stefan, for agreeing to speak. Suprabha was delighted when you both agreed, and the poster we made speaks volumes for the type of celebration of life that you both have been doing for a long, long time. In some ways, I'm jealous because you got to see kind of forest that I will never see. I also worry that the generation to come will probably say the same about me. But still, I think through your words and through your actions and what you will share with us today, you're going to help us renew our tryst, I would say, with Earth and ensure that she remains Gaia. And from Environment Support Group and from Gurukula Botanical Sanctuary, we are mighty happy that this is happening. It is such conversations that actually help us to build a sense of hope and a sense of, and develop clarity as well, I would say, in terms of how we are approaching our lives. So on that note, I invite Suprabha Seshan from Gurukula Botanical Sanctuary to take forward the proceedings of this evening. Again, once more, I want to remind you all to please turn off your cell phones. Please mute your audio so that the speakers get to speak and we can hear. If your bandwidth is low, try and stop the video, then you can hear us clearly. You can send your questions to the chat room, questions and comments to the chat room, and we will try to bring it on to the speakers. So Suprabha will explain how this next 2 hours at least will spend together. Yeah, on that note, Suprabha, go ahead.
We have to begin with an apology to anyone who might feel bad about the fact that we have used the word blind. It's to do with sensitivity to the subject, and maybe we could have used other words. And in fact, lots of alternatives have come up from the speakers and from Leo and me and other people we have spoken to. Why are we insensitive to Gaia? Why are we anti-Gaia? Why do we have Gaia blindness? And so maybe this is just something to keep in mind as we proceed, is just the question of perception itself, and who sees what, and how do we see or perceive anything. I hope somebody is going to be admitting all the people who are just, there's lots of people coming in. So, and that's really nice that we have people who have signed up from Benin, from Uganda, from Nepal, lots of people from South America, India, all over India, Chhattisgarh, Kerala, and the UK, Netherlands, South Africa. So it's a Gaia level coming together, I think. Of course, so many of us are also part of communities in places which don't have access to this technology. I'll be very sad that they can't be part of this, but I hope to take it back to them on my part. So Antonio and Stefan, people would have read the blurb from both of you. I was wondering if we could begin, both of you in turn, taking us a little bit on your personal journey and on your quest and some of the things that have inspired you, and what was your journey like? Who did you meet? Who was integral to your quest? What troubles did you come upon? And how are you here today? So is this something that you can share with us?
Sure, yeah.
Stefan, do you want to go?
Okay. How long have I got? About 5-10 minutes?
5 to 10 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I was born in Venezuela, which is next door to Brazil. And that's very significant for me because I had a very strong dose of very beautiful nature when I was born, and for 6 years. Then I came to England when I was 6 and started to be educated in the mainstream way. But I had a deep love of nature, And I went through science all the way to university until I got to do zoology for my degree. There I really encountered the real dryness of science, and I would say the soullessness of science in a very disturbing way. And I didn't know why. Why did I love science so much, and I love nature so much? Why do I find this science so disturbing? Now I've got to the university level. What is it? And I didn't know, but I was very disturbed. I was very upset. I know now it's because there's no soul in it. And so I think I went on a quest to find the soul and link it with science. I think that's been my quest. So then I went back to Venezuela and I worked for the Smithsonian Institution And a really key person there was a great scientist called John Eisenberg. And we were out in the great wild llanos of Venezuela and Colombia, wild plains going out for hundreds and hundreds of miles with jaguars and giant anteaters and monkeys and parrots and unbelievable butterflies and plant life galore. And I was there with this great scientist, John Eisenberg, helping to study mammals. And he gave me a shot. He was a bit like Walt Whitman. There was a feeling under the stars when we were looking up at the stars of the Llanos that the universe was a great cosmos, a great whole being. I think that's when I first started to feel it, what I'd been looking for. Anyway, then I went back to England and I did my doctorate on the muntjac deer at Oxford. And there I found soul again with my little deer. They're so exquisite, so beautiful, these little deer. And I spent 6 years studying them. And I had a beautiful ancient woodland all to myself to be with them in. But of course, I couldn't express it. I mean, if I went to the zoology department and I said, I couldn't even have the language of it. I just had an experience of soul with the muntjac. They'd think, right, I think you need to be out of here. You shouldn't be doing science. And then later I went to Costa Rica and Nepal. And eventually I ended up back in England. And I met this person called Satish Kumar. And Satish Kumar is from India. And of course, he was establishing this new college called Schumacher College, and they were looking for an ecologist. Well, I wanted to go back to Costa Rica to be in the rainforest and do research in the rainforest. But that wasn't to be, obviously, because Satish Kumar told me, you know who the first person who's going to be teaching a course at Schumacher College is? And I said, no. He said, it's going to be James Lovelock. You have these moments when a sort of big penny drops in your life, and you realize this is fate. I mean, this is something I can't struggle against. I have to go with this. This is James Lovelock, one of the greatest scientists of all time. He's coming to teach at Schumacher College. He's going to teach Gaia theory. So I met James Lovelock, Jim, and we became very, very good friends. It was really lovely, really amazing. And I spent a lot of time with him. I went up to his laboratory many times and we started doing some mathematical modeling work together. It was just fantastic. I think he was one of the most important people I've met. And then that set me on my path to Gaia. Then I realized Gaia is my path. And I came at it from science to begin with. But because I was at Schumacher College, I was always trying to find the soul to link it with, never quite succeeding. We had Rupert Sheldrake here, who was a very soulful scientist and of a very deep caliber. And I learned a lot from him and Fritjof Capra. Many, many great people have been here. And all the time I've been absorbing all of that and making this Gaia alchemical brew. So I've come to realize that Gaia is actually now the point where I am now, I'm 67 this year. I've come to the point where I realize that Gaia is psyche and science together, completely unified. And what I'm trying to do is find that even deeper unification between the two. So that's as far as I've got in my journey so far.
Thank you, Stefan. Antonio, would you like to tell us about your life, your journey?
Listening to Stefan's recollection of a lifetime, I was trying to assess deep recesses of my memory. And I got back to when I was 11 years old. And my father used to be a soccer player and my mother was a painter. My father was watching a TV inauguration of the Trans-Amazon Highway, 1970. And this general, back then we had a dictatorship. Now the generals are back in power in Brazil. And this general was, standing on a tree stump that was like 10 meters in circumference, and it was shot down. And he was smoking and commemorating the big advance on the Amazon. And I saw my father crying. My father had this, he grew up in a farm in nature, and he had this innate love for nature. And I saw him crying because they were starting the destruction of the Amazon. And that was incredibly powerful on me for all my career. And I grew up in a piece of just an island of Atlantic forest, which is similar to the Amazon forest near São Paulo, the outskirts of São Paulo. Get this, you slept with the crying of owls and had this connection, because since very early on, we had, my family is from a spiritual background, and really early on we talked about how nature has spirits. Even though we are not Indians, we had this similar sort of take on nature. And when I grew up, I wanted to go to the Amazon. It was far away, didn't have money, so I hitchhiked. And during college, I went 7 times to the Amazon, and I started this connection, which was a mixture of fascination and tears. You know, fascination for the beauty, as Stefan was saying, and tears for the sadness of seeing this all being destroyed. And a turning moment in the 1980s was the documentary done by Adrian Cowell called The Decade of Destruction. I remember watching this documentary and crying again in front of the TV. And this has been a repeated sort of fate. I am repeating to this day. I'm 62 now, and I've seen many decades of destructions going on. And this one we are in is the worst in many ways. This on one hand. On the other hand, I start veering in the direction of ecology. I studied agronomy in my undergrad, and then my master's was moments of fascination because it was a master's in ecology. In the midst of the Amazon, I start realizing what means to be inside a living body composed of many organisms, trees and everything, all the myriad of organisms. As Stefan was mentioning, Venezuela was neighbor country with neighbor forests. And then I went to the US for my PhD. I met Bob Harris, who was formerly at NASA. NASA supported my studies there. We were in a Center for Earth System Science, was one of the oldest centers for Earth System Science. And then I got marvels again, and fascination again, and tears again, because now I'm looking from the space and looking down upon Earth and seeing all the destruction, and tears again. And then I went back, long career in the Amazon. We developed this massive project called the LBA, the Large Scale Biosphere Atmosphere Experiment in the Amazon. We have learned, thousands of scientists have learned the intricacies of how the Amazon operates. Then came the Flying River story and many others. And so we arrived to the present moment. I got the COVID-19 in England with my friend Hilton Phillipson, the patron of Global Canopy. We were in pretty bad shape in the hospital, and realizing how we are in Gaia without seeing it. And I have an issue with this blindness or blind story, because we have to be careful not to be overly politically correct. I understand sensitivity, but when we don't see something, we say we're blind. We cannot see it. And some people who have this inherited problem of not seeing is blind, or she is blind. There shouldn't be an attribution of evil in using the word. It's very respectful use of the word, and I insisted that we are not seeing Gaia. And I will come back when I have a chance to speak again. I have a quick presentation to show. I can come back to this point. And now, not because of the COVID-19, but because of what is going on in the Amazon, I have tears again. So it is as a journey of the soul, as Stefan has so nicely put it, is a journey of suffering as well. But it could be a journey of marvel from the perspective, if we open our eyes, if we see what is before us, it's a journey of marvel. And that's what I would like that we explore today, this journey of marvel, and that we get really excited about it, overcome the tears, get on. We need to. That's it.
Brilliant.
Great.
Really good. Yes.
We were thinking that the main part of today's sharing or webinar is really about both your beloveds, which is the forest and the planet. And I was wondering if we could begin with Antonio and then with the forest and then go on to the planet, if that works for both of you.
Mm-hmm.
So Antonio, when I first met you, which is 13 years ago, you were talking about a new theory suggesting that the Amazon is not only the lungs of the planet, but also the beating heart of the earth, as millions of trees work together, releasing water vapor into the air. And I remember you saying that this was not accepted at that time because the conventional theory was that it's the rain that creates the forests. And meanwhile, you were saying, and some other people were saying, that it's actually the forest that creates the rain. So I was wondering if you could tell us about this amazing discovery, but also what it is that you have explored in your studies.
Yes, I had prepared a presentation that was starting from the subject of our gathering today, why we have this Gaia blindness, and going into the Amazon. And I'm not sure if you would like me to answer questions.
You should feel free to just explore for the next 15, 20 minutes as you would like, Antonio.
I will do this starting from the view of Earth and then moving into the life and the Amazon and responding our question. How do I get
what you do now is at the bottom of your screen, you see share screen. So if you have your PowerPoint or picture open, on your Zoom, you go.
I cannot put in a maximized screen because Zoom will not work properly with my presentation. But anyway, you're seeing this slide. This is a picture taken from inside the International Space Station. There is a cupola, this new window to the Earth. I bring one statement attributed to Socrates, this philosopher who lived 2,500 years ago. And he said, when mankind is able to stick his head outside this world and will be able to look back into the world, we realize the greatness of this world. There is this effect called the overview effect that many astronauts undergo, which is as soon as someone hop on a rocket, go outside Earth and look Earth from the outside and see this shimmering ball of emeralds, this emerald blue island hanging on nothing in the blackness of space, in the desert of space. They are instantaneously turned into someone, I would say, someone who can see Gaia. They return to Earth and they have a different perspective. Many of them become religious. Many of them understand the frailty of living in a ball that is, 12,000 kilometers in diameter, zipping through space at an incredible speed. Most people don't realize Earth is crossing the empty space, turning around the sun at a speed that is 92 times the speed of sound, which is about 30 kilometers per second, 108,000 kilometers per hour. And we are living on the surface of this ball as if nothing, we don't realize this. We don't realize that we call the Earth the water planet. On the left here, you have all the water, including the water from the oceans, the aquifers, the ice, and rivers, lakes, etc., in this ball. This is all the water we have on Earth. And on the right, all the air that we have on Earth. Perceiving how the greatness of this system we live on. We live like a flea on the fur of a dog. A flea is living and completing its cycle of existence on the fur of a dog without realizing what the dog is and how the change in dog will change their conditions living there. The common sense ignores the immense hidden complexity of the world. In this point, I will make a provocation for Suprabha, because we had a discussion several years ago about machines and life. She said, Antonio, you should pursue this, comparing living entities with machines. And this is a piece of art, a beetle with a mechanism of a watch in the back. And of course, this is a growth, a very growth representation of the complexity that there is in life. Mankind today cannot respect what it cannot see working, like gears. It comes from long time, centuries, that we developed this mechanical mind that took us completely out of perceptions, of sensorial perception. And if we don't see the mechanism ticking, we tend not to realize the importance of the mechanisms that are there. If you look to nature, we feel the beauty, but we ignore completely what is underneath. And underneath, you have two phenomena, an explanation why we don't see and we don't realize. We see the outside, but we don't realize what is inside. Two things. First is miniaturization. You know, nature operates at the level of atoms and molecules. And everything in nature is immeasurably complex, so complex that we cannot fathom, we cannot completely understand this complexity, where one single human body has 37 trillion cells. Each cell has 100 trillion atoms. This type of complexity rivals the greatness in terms of scale to an astronomical view of the universe. So miniaturization makes it invisible to us. And the second thing is automation. You know, automation, for example, hop in your car and it works. You're not realizing what is going on inside the engine or the mechanism underneath, but it's just working. You are happy with this and you don't bring it to conscious mind what is happening. The same is happening inside your tongue, in your mouth. When you're putting a portion of food in your mouth and you start chewing on that food and you're speaking, you're breathing all at the same time. The complexity, the neuronal and physiological complexity involved in just eating is mind-boggling if you bring it to conscience. This is in the root of Gaia. If you look this simulation done by Andy Lomas and showing how the multiplication of cells progresses in any living tissues. Stefan mentioned this other colleague from UK who started his career, I forgot his name. He has a TED talk that has been censored.
Rupert Sheldrake.
Yes. And you look to what is happening, depending on the multiplication of cells, there will be different tissues being produced. Different tissues produces different organs. All of this, many or most of the mechanisms involved in this development, morphological development of tissues, is unknown to science. We don't yet explain how a bunch of identical cells differentiate and produce different tissues in a coordinated fashion. And so it's happening all the time. It's happening, each one watching this webinar, it's happening everywhere in Gaia. And we are not seeing this. We are completely blind for this type of complexity and marvel that's happening inside us, outside us, and allowing us to exist, right? And then getting this perspective, what life, the complexity of life, the mechanical complexity of life, which is much more than just mechanics and much more than we can conceive, really. Then we get to the biomes, the big biomes, everything that's green on Earth. So you see that except for the deserts and the ice, you have the impression that green is everywhere on the planet. But if you look into the productivity of those biomes, you have a much different picture. Some places are hotter in terms of concentration of life. And chief among the biomes on land, you have the tropical belt. I could call it the carbon engine of the planet is lying on the tropical belt. Not by chance, there is where you find the most rich ecosystems on Earth. This is a static picture, but I want to show you this image produced by Yadvinder Mali at Oxford University. The people who did this were very creative. This is basically each frame in this animation is showing you the relative proportion of the total productivity or total photosynthesis on the planet. of that specific pixel. And so you see that the deserts don't appear because it doesn't have vegetation. And the boreal forest, of course, shuts off completely during winter and then comes back in spring and summer. But what I want to call your attention in this beating graph of 10 years data, Gaia is pulsating like a heart is beating. You have a heartbeat on Gaia. And this is only showing land. You could show this for the oceans and other ecosystems on Earth. This heartbeat is true for every living entity in the planet. If you look to the discoveries, recent discoveries that even trees have heartbeats. It's a very slow beat, but nonetheless, it's a heartbeat. We have heartbeats. You know, a single cell has a pulsation. This is a characteristics of a living entity. And there is also a mystery in this heartbeat, how it's connected to something that we don't usually frame in our discussions when we try to be objective or scientific. We don't say about love. Love is a concept that is in humanities, in romance, and in arts, in poetry. Every lay person's terms, love is something that people talk about, but it's very hard to frame. In this point, I go back to the Amazon. We realize that love is behind complexity. This incredible force of fusion. You know, in the sun, you have 4 million tons of hydrogen fusing every second, producing helium, incredible amount of energy. When you love someone and you truly love someone, you feel this fusion, you feel the generation of energy. And that's what I see happening in nature. When you look, for example, the biodiversity in the Amazon and the richness, you see this fusion happening. You see that happening. And it's not competition. Competition has a role there, but it's a minor role. It's basically collaboration, cooperation. Then you see this massive biome doing things that it's not only good for itself, which it is, it's good for all the others. And you see, for example, the trees in the Amazon releasing what I call the exogenous C vitamin, the organic volatile gases like terpenes, isoprenes in the atmosphere. They will combine with pollutants like nitrogen and sulfur oxides and clean the air. So the purest air on the planet you can breathe in the Amazon because the trees are releasing these chemical brushes of sorts and cleaning the air. The same in terms of the beating that you saw, trying to connect those things, how the mechanical underpinnings of life is basically associating always to produce richness and complexity. In the case of the Amazon, you can see this, we talk a lot about carbon, but we don't talk about water vapor. Water vapor, this is data, I think 2005, is a sensor from the NASA's Aqua satellite, and it's integrating and seeing what is invisible. We don't see it, but the sensor and the satellite can see the column of water vapor. And you see that around the equator, you have a belt of water vapor, which is a heat trapper. You know, water vapor traps more heat than CO2. CO2 is 20%, water vapor more than 60%. It would be detrimental for climate change and global warming if not for the trees. The trees can convert water vapor from a heating agent into a cooling agent. As if you go under a tree and it's transpiring during the day and under sunshine, you will feel the cooling effect, powerful cooling effect. It happens also in the global sense. To conclude this part about the tropical forest, not only the Amazon is the largest, is really the heart of the planet, but also the Congo forest, the forest in Southeast Asia and in India and other areas that lie in the tropical belt. They are incredibly important for the climate of the whole planet. So what is happening in the Amazon now, in the Brazilian Amazon, is not a problem of Brazil. It's a problem of Gaia. It's a problem. It's like this being, this large being, this planetary being, is being hurt in its heart. We see this happening in a sense that for millions of years, the Amazon has stood challenges from climate change, natural climate change, like natural disaster, glaciations and warming and cooling, and it stood there. And you can see on the left why it stands. It's called the biotic pump. The biotic pump is the forest is creating its own climate, and it has a negative feedback loop where as soon as climate drifts away from the optimum, the system will crank through complexity and incredibly elaborate mechanisms, physical mechanisms, for the climate to go back to the average. And what you see on the right here is parts of the Amazon, about half of the Amazon now, is crossing towards the tipping point. The tipping point will push the Amazon down different equilibria with climate, where you will have even forests that have been preserved, will eventually wither and die back and disappear, and will be substituted by savanna. And this is a disaster. There are works indicating that this has happened thousands of years ago in the Sahara and also in the Australia and the big deserts in the world, in Saudi Arabia. We are doing it now. We are repeating the errors of the past. Now that we have all this knowledge about technology and we are repeating it, why we're doing this? And this is where I come to my tears I mentioned in the introduction. Why are we destroying our own home? We're destroying it in a way that is completely irrational. It's basically suicidal. Coming to a conclusion to these elaborations, I have some thoughts. There is a present demand for a war effort to restore Gaia. If we stop burning fossil fuels and we lose the living ecosystems, we're done with. I wanted to tell this to the youngsters like Greta Thunberg and many others that bought this story that we just stop emitting greenhouse gases and we'll be okay. And it's not true, absolutely. If we look into what we already know of the living Earth, the living planet, we cannot afford to lose any more tree or any more animal or any more ecosystems and degrade them. In fact, just protecting what is left is no longer sufficient. We need to go much farther. The United Nations is starting next year the decade for ecosystem restoration. This is the time all humans should do, like in Ethiopia, I think it was in August, they planted 353 million trees in 12 hours. We need to do more. We need not only to plant the trees, we need to reestablish our connection with nature that will be responsible and caring and loving. I want to quote this James Pathy, environmental lawyer in the US. He said, I used to think that top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that 30 years of good science could address these problems. I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a cultural and spiritual transformation. What is the future that we will choose? It's upon us. There's nothing that will be resolved in scientific or technological, engineering or political or economic terms alone outside the humans. And then this is internet wisdom. I don't know the author. If an egg is broken by an outside force, life ends. If broken by an inside force, life begins. Great things always begin from the inside. And finally, this quote by Buckminster Fuller, who is a wise man, make the world work for 100% of humanity in the shortest possible time through spontaneous cooperation without ecological offense or disadvantage to anyone. And to close, I point to an avenue of opportunity for the Western society, for civilization as it has become global. We should, above all, empower forest peoples or native peoples. and learn with them, because they have managed, in spite of all the destruction and genocide that's still going, these brave humans have been able to keep a store of wisdom from the past, ancestral wisdom. And especially, they have kept the knowledge of how to live in harmony with nature, how to interact with nature in a way that they don't need the gears or the mechanism or the satellites or computers. We can use all of those, but we can learn with them. And I tell quickly this experience I had after 20 years studying the Amazon, especially in the project called the LBA, studying how the forest made the rain, as Suprabha have mentioned, coming to the conclusion that it's not the rain that allows the forest to be there, it's the forest that allows the rain to happen and brings the rain to the land. I heard once a declamation by a wise Yanomami Indian, David Copenau Yanomami, and he said, doesn't the white man know that if he cut down the forest, the rain will end, and if the rain ends, he will have nothing to drink or to eat? And I heard that, and I had tears on my eyes and an incredible realization. We have studied for 20 years something that the Indians already knew in a simple manner, in a simple fashion. Had we gotten their knowledge beforehand, maybe we could have spared so much of destruction, because we would know from the beginning how they knew from the beginning. A few months later, I met him and I asked him, I said, how did you know? And especially because the Yanomami land has not been deforested for ages. We can see this in charcoal, how long that forest stood there. It had been there for thousands of years. And so David told me, he said, the ancestrals knew. And then I replied and said, how do your ancestors learn? And then he said, because the spirits of the forest taught them, and they respected the spirits of the forest because they were wise, the ones who created the forest. So with this, I finish my long intervention here, hoping that the main message would come across, that we can do whatever with, and technology is great. Otherwise, in this webinar here, we wouldn't fly in a jet or go to the space and look Earth from the outside. But at the same time, we have to develop humbleness. We have to connect with the heart, as we saw with these wonderful graphics showing the beating of the forest on the world scale. And connecting with the heart means love. And we should not be afraid of talking about love and connecting. So that's it. Thank you.
Great. I think while we're digesting what you have just gifted us, Antonio, I mean, that image of the beating biomes, the beating hearts of biomes and the whole planet, it's going to stay with us. There are some questions, but it might be good to hear from Stefan about Gaia and the whole planet, and how you have come into what you're going to share with us, Stefan.
Yeah, thank you, Sipi.
Yeah.
I want to pick up on what Antonio was saying, actually not so much from a scientific perspective, well, I could do that, because he's given us a very good flavor for the science already. Just briefly though, if you want me to say something about the science, it's that Lovelock's idea, Jim Lovelock's insight, is that when all the organisms, so imagine all the beings in that rainforest, all those rainforest beings, the plants, the fungi, the bacteria, the animals, all of them interacting very deeply with the rocks, with the air around them, the atmosphere like Antonio showed us, and the water. When these interactions are going on in a really complex way, like Antonio mentioned, over the whole planet, not just in the rainforests, but also everywhere. Antonio showed us, in that picture of the Earth, the whole Earth, everywhere these interactions are going on, and in the ocean, of course. Then what happens is you get what we call in science an emergent property. Something very unexpected happens, and that is that out of all these myriad complex interactions that Antonio described so beautifully, you get the global scale emergence of the ability of the whole system, the whole planet, to regulate its key surface variables such as its temperature, the planetary temperature, the planetary distribution of key elements like nitrogen, sulfur, phosphorus. So I'm just giving a summary of Gaia theory, building on what Antonio was saying, which is that when he was talking about complexity and gave us a lovely view of complexity. Think of that going on over the entire surface of the planet and in the oceans and land. All these complex interactions between living beings, rocks, atmosphere, and water. And what emerges from those interactions is the ability of the planet as one great whole, as one great organism, to regulate key aspects of her surface, including her temperature, distribution of key elements, acidity of her oceans, etc. There's this amazing emergent self-regulation. The planet becomes a self. The planet becomes a unified organism. Now, this is controversial in science. Most scientists don't like you to say the Earth is an organism. You have to say it's a system. I prefer to call it a being or an organism. So that's the idea that in science of Gaia theory, the emergence of planetary self-regulation because of all the myriad feedbacks between living beings on the one hand and atmosphere, rocks, and water on the other. That's Gaia. And I think Antonio gave us a great feeling for that. So now I think Antonio established that really well and gave us a really lovely feeling for how the forests, the Amazon, and all the forests, in fact, release cloud-seeding chemicals and how that cools the earth and helps to regulate her temperature. There are other ways Gaia does it, by the weathering of certain rocks that take CO2 out of the atmosphere, and that carbon finds its way into the shells of exquisite algae on the surface of the ocean. They're called coccolithophores. They make exquisite chalky shells with carbon from the atmosphere, weathered from the rocks on the land. And the carbon goes down into the depths and cools the earth and eventually returns through volcanoes. And that's a negative self-regulating feedback as well. We're not going to go into describing that. But there are so many of these astonishing feedbacks that have been discovered because of James Lovelock and his Gaia theory. And just to finish on the science bit, one of the most exciting things that's happening now in the science is that at last, people are very eminent scientists like W. Ford Doolittle. They're beginning to realize that natural selection can happen at the level of Gaia. And this is a complete revolution in evolutionary thinking, because up till now, all evolutionary thinking has been based on selfishness, on the selfish gene. How can I, as a separate organism, get more copies of my genes out into future generations? It's fundamental selfishness. And the puzzle has been, how can that selfishness lead to global scale regulation of temperature, which seems to require tremendous altruism on the part of the organisms, but they're not altruistic, they're selfish. So what's been discovered now is a new level of selection, where there's a kind of selection for persistent ecosystems, for relationships that persist between organisms, plants, animals, etc., and atmosphere, water, rocks, these Gaian relationships that persist over very long periods of time and refine themselves and get better and better and better. They survive better than those that don't. So there's a kind of natural selection amongst ecosystems, which then leads to a Gaia becoming better and better at regulating. And these ideas are published in mainstream journals now, whereas maybe 10, 15 years ago, they would have been poo-pooed as absolutely ridiculous. This is a kind of breakthrough in Gaian science that's happening right now. Also, picking up at the end of Antonio's talk, which I thought was very important. You see, did you notice how Antonio very beautifully took us beyond the science several times? Did you notice that? That he talked about wonder, that sense of wonder that one has in front of nature. The wonder that one's eating one's breakfast, what a miracle it is that I'm eating my food's going to be digested in this interior of me, which I'm very little aware. And all those bits of my food, the atoms and molecules, are going to be shunted around, and most of them constitute into new meanness. I mean, that's extraordinary. There's a sense of wonder Antonio spoke about. Then he spoke about love. Do you remember how he said a sense of love, and how Antonio so really touchingly had tears coming down his face when he saw his father crying over the initial destruction of the Amazon. You remember that? You see, that's a quality of love as well, and compassion and communion. And so, and then Antonio spoke about, right at the end of his presentation, he spoke about the indigenous persons. You remember, he was up there to hear with water, and how they saw the forest and how they loved the forest, and how their ancestors knew that cutting down the forest would lead to catastrophe for all of life, including human life. And how did they know that? Because they were in touch with the spirits of the forest, Antonio told us. So you see, what we have a gamut of, Antonio not only told us about the science, but he also gave us a gamut of psyche, a sort of a spread of psychological capacities. One of them is the ability for wonder. That's a psychological capacity which we have to cultivate. We have to cultivate it. Children seem to have it spontaneously, but unfortunately, our educational system tends to diminish that. Some of us escaped it. I think Antonio managed to dodge that particular obstacle. I fell into it a lot when I was doing my first degree in zoology. So the ability to feel wonder, the ability to feel love for nature, and just to feel love generally, that's a capacity we can cultivate. And another capacity which I find very interesting, which Antonio ended with, is the ability to feel the spiritual nature of things. Now, I hate to put it like that because there's a tremendous prejudice against spirituality or spirit or anything to do with animism or the livingness in nature, tremendous weight of prejudice against that view in our culture. People were burnt at the stake for espousing that view. Thousands of people were burnt at the stake. You know, I suppose it was in the 17th century, maybe earlier, certainly in Europe, for thinking that. And yet, or for feeling that, for experiencing that, for daring to say that was the deep reality of things. And yet the indigenous people, they knew that the forest should not be cut down because the spirit of the forest, the spirits of the forest told them that. I mean, that's a capacity for spiritual perception that we also have. So what I'm saying really is that if we want to solve the crisis, we have to cultivate ourselves psychologically, like we cultivate a garden. We are a psychological garden. Every single one of us is a psychological garden with treasures hidden there for us to discover. The treasure of love, the treasure of wonder, the treasure of being able to feel the spiritual nature of plants, the spirits in plants, the spirits of trees, the spirits of brooks, just like Shakespeare said, tongues in trees, sermons in stones, etc. You know, Shakespeare knew this. In those days in Europe, it was known. But unfortunately, during the scientific revolution, we lost it very, very seriously. We lost it very badly. So for 400 years, we've lost these psychological capacities within the culture as a whole. Of course, there were people who did have them, like Goethe, for example, and many other people, Hildegard of Bingen, for example. But now I think our task is to rediscover these psychological capacities in ourselves very quickly. But this time it's got to be in relation to Gaia. Unless Gaia is calling us now in our generation. It's the biggest call humanity's ever had from the planet herself. This is the biggest call we've ever had in the history of our species, and maybe the biggest call ever in the history of the planet. That a conscious species that she has produced out of herself, mainly us, is now becoming so deeply destructive because this particular culture has forgotten how to listen to Gaia, to the earth. We've become, okay, I hate to say it, because I get the point of the criticism. We've become, let's not say Gaia blind if you don't want to say blind, that's fine. But as Antonio said earlier, blind casts no aspersion on blindness. It's just that one can't perceive Gaia. We're not able to perceive her. And so I think what we need to do now, or put it this way, what I'm doing for myself, I mean, I don't want to say what anyone else should do, but what I'm doing for myself and what I'm finding is very helpful for people is to combine the science of Gaia, which Antonio was speaking about and which I've been involved in as well with Lovelock and others, brilliant science of Gaia, with a way of cultivating these qualities of wonder and love and being able to feel the spirit in rocks and rivers and stones and plants and animals. And there are many ways of doing it. And all I would say is find one that suits you, that suits your temperament, and just cultivate yourself like you're cultivating a garden. Now, one that works for me very, very well, I mean, there's several, but one that works for me, I have to say this, on the public platform, is the psychology of Carl Gustav Jung. We haven't taken that nearly seriously enough. Nowhere near seriously enough. We sort of disregard him as some kind of crank, but he wasn't. He was an incredibly brilliant empirical scientist of the psyche. And he made very important discoveries that we need to learn from. We need to put Freud in his proper place. He's very good if you have certain types of problems, but he's no good as a guide for a culture as a whole. He's certainly no use at all for as a guide towards a Gaian culture. For that, really, of all the Western psychologists of modern times, we need to listen to Jung. And he told us that there are things within us, psychological capacities that we can cultivate, which will allow us to see, feel the wonder of nature, to feel deep love for nature, to see the spirits in rocks and trees and plants and all beings. And these things are called images. They're called images. They come from the psyche because the psyche is nature. You see, nature isn't just matter. Nature is matter-psyche, psyche-matter. It's one thing, both psyche and matter. We tend to focus on the matter side of things in Western culture. But we need the psyche just as much as matter, otherwise we'll never solve the problem. The psyche is slippery, mysterious, but it's alive. It's full of intentionality. It's teleological. Science doesn't like this, doesn't like intention in nature. Well, I'm sorry, science. Intention is in nature. You have to accept it. It's there in nature. It's a fundamental part of nature because nature is also psyche. And so if we work with certain images, for example, mandala images, images of wholeness, circular images of wholeness, and we contemplate them, we sit with the image and we say, okay, this great psychologist, this great discoverer of the psyche, as great as Darwin was a discoverer of evolution and natural selection and how nature works in that way, so was Jung an equally great discoverer of the nature of psyche, which of course the indigenous people that Antonio told us about, they knew about psyche, all right. They had ceremonies, they had mandalas, they had images and stories and myths which connected us with this deep realm. So we need to, I would suggest, well, for me, cultivating an appreciation of these images, such as the mandala images, or I would also say alchemical images are very, very helpful indeed. I've been working with alchemical images on myself for some time, and I find that they really do begin to cultivate these qualities. I feel a sense of the wonder of nature more often than I used to. I feel moments of deep love for nature, which surprise me. And I feel more and more that plants do have spirits and trees do have spirits in a very sort of empirical way, non-flaky, non-new age, very empirical. As a scientist, I can feel it. And this makes me feel whole. And I think for me, this path of uniting Gaia science with the psyche, I call it, let's say, alchemy, if you like, for me is a very fruitful path. And I think somehow the whole culture needs to move in that direction. We need to unify psyche and science. And I think exactly what Antonio was saying, his whole talk, you could feel it all the way through. So the question is, the issue is to recognize that we have a global mental illness. I mean, we have COVID now, which is a global physical illness, but we also have a global mental illness, which is that we can no longer perceive Gaia. We have no idea that Gaia is there, just as Antonio said in his talk at the very beginning of his talk, about not perceiving the complexity of our own bodies. We don't perceive the complexity of the earth. But to do that, I think we need the help of images. We need to develop our imagination. We haven't got a Gaia imagination. That's the thing. We have Gaia science, Earth system science, we have all that, but we don't have a Gaia imagination. And the way to cultivate imagination is through poetry, through images, through the psyche, through music, but fundamentally through images that the psyche gives us. And so my plea is, for Western culture at last to wake up to the unity of science and psyche, because that's the only way I can see it, that we can cure this terrible illness of Gaia, I don't know what to call it, blindness or lack of ability to perceive Gaia. We need to cure that by bringing psyche and science together. Okay, I think that's enough. I hope you heard what I said. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good. Very good.
So there we are, Supi. Are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Yes.
That's good.
Leo, do you want to?
Yeah, I want to ask a question. In fact, not merely a question, but one which hopefully speaks to both, speakers' wonderful analysis of our state of mind as it is an analysis of the state of the world. I mean, both of you in your own ways explain the importance of crying about what we have done.
Uh-huh.
And to be able to cry requires a particular sensitivity. If we just went out to the street and cried about the state of the world, people would call us mad. But you're right, Stefan, when you say the entire world is in a state of insanity because it can't see the world. It can't see Gaia.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bit of a paradox that when we grew up, and I think it's probably, this is a question actually, if it had to do with the way in which our reductionist education has blocked our natural imagination. Because, me, for instance, is, as you said, filled with trillions of cells. Each cell is capable of taking care of itself, but it is also it is interdependent with trillions of other cells. So we have this innate capacity of knowing from within that an organism is an amazing organization where each cell wants to stay integral and yet is aware of the importance of cooperative and collaborative living. But why is it that the world which we created, especially in the last few centuries, has turned out to be so atomized? And I find it very, very, very problematic that this atomized thinking has become the text in which the world is ruled today. I read texts of the United Nations. I mean, even for instance, the IPCC report, when I read, it does not see the earth as a living organism. It sees the earth as a chemical construct in which life originated, and of course talks about biodiversity, but doesn't speak of it in the sense that it is interdependent. Words are used, but the feeling is not there. When I think deeply about how they write that text, I worry that it's largely written, especially the text which heads of governments agree on, are written by lawyers mainly. It's not that lawyers should not have feelings. In fact, they should have more feelings than the rest of us because they hear so many different types of arguments through their lives. But why do they end up writing text which takes away Gaia from itself?
Well, just to answer briefly, I mean, it's a very deep question, Liam. We don't really know, but one possibility is that it all started when the sky god culture came out of the East in the Neolithic and wiped out the mother goddess cultures of the Middle East. That could be the beginning of it. And it spread to all over the world from there. Because the mother earth cultures, we have evidence that in those civilizations, women were very important. They were the priestesses, they were holders of the household. We don't find very few weapons or no weapons at all in that culture. And we find lots of sculptures to the goddess. So I think we can say, I mean, this has been challenged somewhat, but we can still say that there was a great culture, which was a Gaian culture, in, say, the late Neolithic period, and probably, obviously, before that too. But by the late Neolithic, we had agriculture. No, sorry, not Neolithic. Well, yes, these are the first agricultural societies that came out of the Neolithic. The first agricultural societies. They were tilling the soil, but they were worshipping the earth as a goddess. I mean, they felt her as alive. Like we need to feel her like that again. That was swept away by the sky god culture from the east, by horsemen, very violent horsemen who believed that the divinity was not the earth; it was some masculine entity up there in heaven who was quite fierce. And he wanted to wipe out this androgynous god called Elohim, which the agriculturalists had, and they succeeded. And it could be that we've been suffering from that problem ever since. So in other words, it's deep within us, this sense of separation and wanting to cut ourselves off. I think the first step is to recognize that that's part of our psyche as well, and just to become aware of that, and then to gradually become free of it and move into a more Gaian perception in which we are one with the earth. So asking why it happened, does it help? Maybe it does, yes. But to really answer the question, I think we have to feel a separation. I have to feel a separation in myself so that I can begin to heal it.
May I add to Stefan's answer quick?
Please.
I have been thinking about this this issue that Leo raised. Stefan has put so well, you know, the early roots. I would like that we consider the closer roots to our time. And we should be able and willing to reassess the history of modern times, starting from the Inquisition, because there are so many explanations that clarify what went wrong. You know, if I look from a perspective of today, and we see that when we discover something, looking or gazing into a microscope, and we see something that explains, for example, the coronavirus, and we get proud of having found this clarification or this illumination. We go back in history and we see how this process led us into reductionism that Stefan mentioned. We divide and we focus and we amplify and we get success. We discover a vaccine, we fly a jet turbine, we do things that will make us very proud. It produces a lot of dopamine in our brain. We have pleasure doing this. And then it's self-reinforcing bias type of mechanism. But if we go back there in the Inquisition, what we see, if I could summarize, we see a massacre of the feminine, a massacre of the feminine, which every time a wise woman or a wise person that had this connection with the Mother Earth, that has this integrative knowledge of life and phenomena, they were condemned and burned in a public stake. And this is incredibly traumatizing. And it's still alive inside our brains. It's inherited. And then you get someone like Da Vinci, who was a holistic genius. He was able to do, you know, Mona Lisa, and he was able to conceive imagination, as Stefan was mentioning. He imagined the helicopter and so many incredible technologies. He was a seer of the future. And nonetheless, he was holistic. 100 years later, you see someone like Francis Bacon, who was an aristocrat, who had not read Da Vinci because Da Vinci wrote in code. And then Francis Bacon and the Renaissance was rejecting the religious disgrace that was the Inquisition. It was disgraceful, really. And so that's where science and technology were born in the present form. It was like a revolution against the absurdity of the Inquisition. And there is where we have a divorce. We have a divorce of rationality, you know, the things that you can crank with your own reasoning, and spirituality, which was a terrain and a domain of the church, and the church would kill you and torture you and burn you in a public stake. And so this divorce, we have somehow to overcome. We have to go back and mend this historical mishap. And then, of course, after the divorce, the human reasoning was set free, so to speak, set free. And then Descartes comes with the rationalistic thing, and then Adam Smith with the invisible hand, which influences Darwin. Darwin discovers natural selection in nature, different than Wallace. Wallace was not so fond of natural selection as Darwin, but Darwin got a big boost. And then Thomas Huxley, the bulldog of Darwin, was the one who picked individual selection and pushed it to glory, and discrediting the group selection or the community selection. Then the aristocracy in England finds it very convenient that natural selection puts ennoblement on selfishness. Look, the lions in the Serengeti, they are eating the gazelle, and this is great. This is how nature operates. This was very convenient for the powerful of the time, you know? And then you accept this. This is still ruling Wall Street today, or City London. These people say they feel like they are empowered to do this because this is how nature operates. You know, or a lion eats the gazelle, and he's super powerful, is successful, and that's how nature operates. This was a fundamental mishap that started back with Francis Bacon and with the Inquisition. And you can go back and back and back with the Roman Empire and how it captured the grassroots Christianism, almost 2,000 years ago. And so, unless we do this recollection, and we put history under this gaze, and that's not biased by a creed, a modern creed of rationalism, because it has become a creed. Where is written that science cannot ponder on love? Where is written this? Where is written that science cannot or should not ponder on spirit, or spirituality, or transcendence? This, if I am talking about something that is in pursuit of the truth, it should not be held by those boundaries. Those boundaries are innately similar to what religious boundaries are made. When you have a religious belief and you cannot cross certain boundaries of dogma, that's how it operates. The religion operates like this way. Science should not. At least it pretended not to be operating this way. So I bring this pondering to us here in this discussion because I think it's so important. Why there should not be a plan in nature. This is another dogma in biology. It has a very strong root in biology, but no evidential facts to support it. It's a dogma. It's something that say you cannot have anything ordering nature. Like when you have a development of cells, embryogenesis, and you have a bunch of cells that are identical, and then a group of cells specialize. Who is controlling that? Where is the orchestra, the conductor? Where is the conductor? Who is? It's not in DNA. DNA is planning, is controlling all the production of proteins, and we have learned a lot about this in molecular biology. But who is controlling the DNA? Who is telling to the DNA, now this part is active and the other is not? And it's doing this in a synchronicity that's unbelievably fantastic. We haven't found yet the software of life. We have found the hardware. The hardware is every day more and better explained. But where is the software? The software is virtual. It's not, it's the immaterial. It's not material. It's the same as in a computer. You have the software in computer controlling the computer. Imagine someone coming from extraterrestrial, coming and finding our computers. He doesn't know anything about humans or anything. He's just searching to learn what is this phenomena called humans and their technology. And he started examining a computer without turning it on. And he will find the hard drive. He will find zeros and ones in magnetic spins in the hard drive. He'll find the microprocessor. He'll find everything about the hardware. But if he doesn't turn on, if he doesn't see software, which is immaterial, he won't understand the phenomena, the computer. It's the same. We have life has a hardware. I was talking and mentioning briefly, and Stefan commented more on the hardware of life. We are very well equipped to deal and to explain, to detail, to reduce the hardware. But we are preventing the software to be analyzed with the fear that is a ancestral fear that we will be burned again by the inquisitors if we accept that there is a software controlling the hardware. And this is not something that goes against the law. Sorry, you can, Stefan wants to speak.
No, that's lovely, Antonio. I don't know if we can have a little dialogue, but I just wanted to say it's the fear of psyche that we're scared of. I know as a scientist, when I was in science, mainstream science, I was a little worried to say I was interested in Jung, for example, and interested in these things. Now it's changed. Just one thing I wanted to add. You know that science has got so far beyond the neo-Darwinist view that we're in a different century in biology now. I mean, we know how important I taught at Schumann College with Jim several times, and I was lucky to work with her. Cooperation. She showed that every single cell in our body is descended from a very ancient event in which one bacteria engulfed another bacteria, and the engulfed bacteria became the mitochondrion, which now powers our bodies. You know, I mean, that's a deeply cooperative event, as you were saying, Antonio. You know, we now in biology, it's accepted. Cooperation is really important, and it may even be that competition is secondary to cooperation. I'm giving you the sort of mainstream view, but our culture as a whole is still stuck in the 19th century with Darwin, where it always takes 200 years for the culture to catch up with the latest science, the latest understanding in science. The trouble is we haven't got 200 years, we've got 10 years. That's all we've got. We've got 10. We haven't got 200 years. So how are we going to accelerate this development? Well, as I said before, we've got to take the psyche seriously and start working with methods for developing the psyche really fast, you know, developing the imagination, the imaginative capacity to be able to see and love nature. And one of the important ways, I mean, this is really simple. One of the important ways to do that is just to spend time with nature. It's all we have to do. We have to convince everyone, hey, you know what, everybody? Spending time with nature is good for your mental health, good for your physical health. Go and spend some time in as wild a place as you can find. Or maybe if you're locked down now, with some plants inside your house, arrange them beautifully and put some stones there and just calm down and really feel the soul of this place. That's all we have to do. We just have to spend time with nature, with Gaia, and I think Gaia wants us to develop this imagination, this Gaia imagination, really fast, and she's going to help us. We make one move to opening in yourself, a more calm, a more deeper perceptions of things, of people around you, of your relationships, of your bird song and your clouds. You see, I mean, I hate to say this as a scientist, but I mean, I'm not allowed to say it as a scientist, but Antonio said it too. Gaia is really teleological. Gaia's up to something. There's a purpose in nature, a very deep meaning and purpose. And our task now, if we want to save ourselves on the planet, is to find that purpose, each of us individually. What does it mean for us? Our own particular purpose, which is going to be helpful to our Gaia and to all her beings and to human beings as well. That's the task. It's a psychological task. That's all I want to say. Compliments Antonio beautifully. I think we're coming at it from different angles, but we're both scientists and we've both discovered what's been missing in our culture.
Do you want to field some questions? Thank you both.
We have so many that I don't know where to begin reading out some of, well, let me just throw in a concern which has come up several times from many people, and they're also, feeling so worried, and that's, I think, universal. Indigenous people have felt and expressed Gaia in its multiple forms through their multiple languages. And yet today we have indigenous people who are most vulnerable to COVID-19. In fact, this is a question from Renata, a comment from Renata. Mysore Mutt from another city close to where I live worries, in fact, what if it spreads through those communities? What happens to our own understanding of what they know, which we don't seem to care about now, but we must care about? And perhaps rapidly, as you rightly said, 10 years is all we have, or probably less. So how do we make that transition so swiftly? Either of you, I don't know who wants to go first. Antonio? Yeah.
We have this genocide happening again. If we don't know our history, we are condemned to repeat it. That's what we have been doing, repeating history endlessly. That's why we cannot afford not to revisit history. And we have to somehow solve the issues, historical issues, and come to a realization, a collective realization, what went wrong. We have been trying in Brazil, and the ISA, Instituto Socioambiental, is a very proactive NGO in Brazil and working with the Indians. They have done many things, and among them, an initiative to help the Indians cope with this divisive and reductionistic mind, European mind, so to speak, or the Western way of rationalistic thinking. I had the chance to go to the Indian reservation, Xingu Indian reservation. The Indians wanted to know how the white people saw things. So I had to go over and explicit to them about our cosmology. I went to the Big Bang, and then how the cosmologists saw the emergence and development of the universe. And at one point, they interrupted me and they asked, how come you're saying that from the Big Bang, that point, there was nothing before? And I said, that's what most cosmologists believe. And then the Indian said, how come? How come? How is it possible that you had something emerging or a reaction without having an action? And just by coincidence, I was teaching to kids 6 to 14 in a school that we started here in our town. One of the kids asked to learn about the Big Bang. Similarly, he was curious to know about this and explain. And this kid had exactly the same reaction as the Indian. Exactly. He said, it's impossible. You cannot have something coming out of nothing, because this defies, the kids say, this defies, my brain can't cope with it. So not long ago, cosmologists start reassessing before the Big Bang story. And now there are some indications that there was time before the Big Bang, according with this mathematical reasoning. And the same with so many subjects in science, that one thing is established and beyond doubt until a next challenge comes and puts a question on it. The story that Suprabha mentioned on the rainforest producing rain, as opposed to the rain producing the rainforest. This was a discovery, and we learned about it. This ISA is trying to do with the Indians is to teach how the white people went wrong, so that they can, with their inclusive and holistic knowledge, can absorb us, understand where we are, and cope with it for their own sake on this situation. We cannot do much about the virus because we have a government that is, to say the least, is genocidal type. So it's very bad, this part now. But I can say something about the difficulty, and I saw many people commenting and questioning here how we do it, how we go and put the same question. What should we do? I bring this thinking of seeing our own minds and trying to understand what happens inside our skull. When we are captured by some subject, we are watching a movie or we are seeking something in the internet, our left cortex is engaged mostly. And we are involved in it's not an imaginative world, it's a world that captures our cognition to a point that we forget to go to the bathroom, we forget to eat, because our left cortex is the locus of abstract thinking, mathematics, this attention in the prefrontal cortex, this incapacity that humans have developed. Other animals have much less of this capacity of thinking in terms of abstractions, is what disconnects us from our own body, because we forget to go to the bathroom, we forget to eat, because we are entertained with something. When we, as Stefan was mentioning, we go to nature, all the sensory capacity that we have in our body is turned on. And then this abstract brain goes to rest. And when this cortex goes to rest, we are able to connect with nature. I live in an apartment building. It's not easy to go to nature. For most people in humanity, it's not easy to go to nature. What I suggest is that we go to nature inside our own body. And to do that, there are many techniques, many Indians in the audience today. And from India comes so incredible, the yoga. You can do yoga, you can do meditation. You can develop a learning on how to put to rest this left cortex, which is hyperactive in Western thinking. And then emerge and cultivate the capacity, the cognitive capacity of our own hearts. The heart can think. They discovered the neural network in the heart. And also in our intestines, we have also neurons, a neural system that is able to cognition. And when we do this, we connect with the nature inside our own body. Because we have, every human has a body, right? And so we should be able to do this if we do this exercise and yoga, meditation, deep relaxing, playing with the kids. And COVID-19 has brought fantastic opportunity for many families like here. Dad and mom are at home full time with the kids. The problems we had with the kids before disappeared, because they wanted to be in this unit that's family. We were, in the previous life, we were almost all the time outside home. The kids were in school or somewhere, and we were not a family, really. And now COVID-19 made us get together and play with the pets, with cats and dogs and whatever, and look to a flower that you can buy. You can buy flowers. And then this is my attempt to respond some of the questions that were put here by the audience, and also what Leo said and Stefan commented. I think it works. And when we can reconnect our hearts, then put to rest our brains, not totally give up on the brains, otherwise we will be headless, but then bring it into harmony. We have to bring the brain back and connect it with our own hearts. That's what I had to say.
Can I say something here, something interesting? I'm very interested in alchemy, as I declared earlier. And alchemy is really about a psychological transformation, and just as you're saying, Antonio, so that you can start to perceive these things, empathy, love. And in the first stage of alchemy, you actually have to eat up your intellect. It's called green lion eating the sun. The sun is the intellect, the green lion is nature. You have to get the intellect out of the way, back into nature, so you can begin to see who nature is. You can feel the spirits in nature once more. The green lion eats the sun. Nature eats your rational mind. Then later, once you've experienced who nature is, then your rational mind comes back in the second part of the transformative alchemical process. But now it's well behaved. It's not going to start causing trouble, like destroying the planet, like our rationality has done, because it's felt the living power of Gaia, and it's in service to that Gaia. The intellect becomes in service of Gaia. Then we can create a Gaian society, which is what we want. So I'm just saying that I found alchemy very interesting as a Westerner. And I think it takes us to the same place the indigenous people are or were, but in our own Western way. And then it actually helps us to understand the indigenous people much better, because we come to the same place by a different route. So just to end, I think you're right, Antonio. And to do that takes a certain effort. You need to do some practice or other, meditation or playing music or looking at alchemical images or working with alchemical images. Or I think we all need to start a pathway of development for ourselves as individuals towards Gaia. We need to cultivate our Gaian imagination, in other words.
So I'm looking at the clock, and it's 1 hour and 40 minutes that we've been together. But there is a compelling combination of questions that have come. One is from Dr. Nagendran. I must say that he served as an expert member on the National Green Tribunal. And he raises he comments that Gaia is in India, could be equivalent to a concept in India which is called Anadi, something that's never born and something that can never die, in a sense like the soul. Indra Vijaysimha, who teaches at the Azim Premji University, says, but shouldn't Gaia also, if she's living, shouldn't she have a beginning and an end?
Well, if I may answer that question briefly. You see, this brings up the fact that Gaia has two dimensions. There's a mythological or depth psychological dimension, in which Gaia is eternal and was never born and will never die. Gaia is a very deep principle of the universe which is beyond our understanding. The ability of the universe to create matter and to create all this abundance of biodiversity on our planet, and no doubt elsewhere in the universe, that comes from a deep place we'll never know. But we can feel it. That's, I would call, depth psychological Gaia. Then there's the actual physical Gaia, which is, that's the Gaia that science deals with. The everyday Gaia, if you like. That was born when, the planet was born when the solar system formed out of a massive supernova explosion, out of which the heavy elements are created. It's an amazing story. And bits of rock were flying around are orbiting the early sun, and they coalesce to form the planets. And then out of a molten ball of rock comes Gaia, as the Greeks say, the deep-breasted Earth with all her biodiversity. And eventually she'll die when the sun gets so huge that she swallows her up. He swallows her up. The sun will swallow up the Earth. I mean, so in that sense, Gaia was born, and will die, and we know about that very well from the science. But the depth psychological, mythological Gaia, that's a deeper Gaia underlying the physical Gaia, and that is definitely eternal. It has a quality of eternity about it. That's how I reconcile those two views of Gaia.
Tony, you want to weigh in on that?
I see that there are many questions coming. Some of the questions are directed to me, and others directed to Stefan. What is the dynamic? How you plan to, Supi?
Wow.
What do you want to do?
Well, you could maybe just very briefly respond to that, and then we could take another question.
Okay. So I see that there is a comment by Vandana Shiva. There is a question from Olivia. Another
take
one.
what you want, Antonio.
One question that I think it's incredibly important is someone mentioning that why water vapor is not taken in account in the IPCC, and it's not accurate. If I have passed this image, sorry, it is taken in account in IPCC. What is not taken in account in the modelings in general is the effect of the biotic pump, or how trees are transforming water vapor from a evil into something that's incredibly important and powerful in cooling Earth. And we'll give you a quick example. If water vapor is trapping heat from the Earth to escape to space, I showed you this image of water vapor around the equatorial belt. This is where the solar incidence is most strong. So this is the heat engine of the planet, the tropics. When you have a forest, what the forest does, it puts water vapor into the air. You could say, oh, this is bad, because then it will trap more heat. And this is taken into account. The amount of water vapor is taken into account in the climate models. What is not taken into account as much as it should is two effects. First, vertical, trees release also scents. I call the pixie dust. The magical powder of the rainforest, which is able to help the condensation of this water vapor. And condensation of water vapor releases the heat that is trapped inside the water vapor, heat that was picked on the surface. That's why trees cool down the surface. And this heat that is born in the water vapor is released high up in the atmosphere and closer to the space, above the layer where you have the heat trapping gases, which is below 5,000 meters or 5 kilometers. And then it's released to space. So this is the first effect. The second effect is that because the water vapor is disappearing in the zone where it's condensing, it lowers the pressure. Lowering the pressure makes that wind from afar is propelled towards this area where its condensation is happening. And this is called the biotic pump. It's not controversial. It is controversy usually in science. It requires that the people against it publish their points or their concerns, and have not been published more than 2 contempts on the biotic pump. All the other is behind the scenes, in the corridors, the people who are against saying, oh, I don't like it. Oh, I don't take it. I don't buy it. This is the kind of thing that we have been hearing for 15 years. Oh, I don't like it. This is totally absurd. I will not even pay attention on this. This is not a controversy. This is a religion, people in religion saying, oh, I don't like the other religion and I don't take it, I don't buy it. Biotic pump is not controversial. It's been published in the main journals. It's based on physics, it's based on laws, the laws of gases and how the atmosphere should work and has been omitted in the mainstream take on these problems. It solves many paradoxes. It resolves the problem of global circulation in many ways. It also allows us to predict what is coming. And we have been using the biotic pump theory and the physical logic of the biotic pump theory to predict what was coming. And we were dead on right in anticipating what was coming. Many meteorological models or climate models, they were good in predicting generally what is coming, but they made mistakes in timing. And now they are correcting it. Those models are being improved and they are getting better. But we knew it before. We knew just from the theory. The biotic pump theory, there was a matter that came out in Science magazine a few weeks ago, which paints it sort of as a controversy, but basically on opinion of people. And that's not how science, if you're against it, you show it. And with many, many implications for what is coming and how we should put ourselves, the importance of forests for taming climate change.
Antonio, I just want to say one of the great things about science is that eventually a paradigm like that, also the antibiotic pump paradigm, will collapse under the weight of evidence. That's a great thing about science. It just takes time, that's all. Like it took time to establish that the continents move. That took time. People thought that was ridiculous when it was first proposed by Alfred Wegener, but eventually that paradigm collapsed. But the problem is we haven't got time for it to happen.
Exactly, Stefan. I want to reinforce this point, and I want to bring back this very quickly, what happened to Gaia. You know, Gaia was a fantastic hypothesis in 1970s. By the late 80s, when the climate change big discussions started, and when the climatologists came on board in this discussion about Earth system, etc., if Gaia was a theory back then as it is now, we could have avoided the destruction that has happened in the intervening time. Because then climate change discussions wouldn't be just a matter of arithmetics or trace gases. There would be an organism behind it, the maintenance of the climate system. And why we didn't? Because of the new Darwinists. The new Darwinists hit so hard Gaia hypothesis because of their creeds. Back then, that was a controversy, and they published many. There is one famous paper that came out in 1981 by Ford Doolittle. Is Gaia motherly? You saw that one.
Yeah, sorry, Antonio, he's changed his mind. That's the amazing thing.
I know, but wait a moment.
Yeah.
Wait. He changed his mind too late. He should be in prison for a crime against humanity. Because his mentality, now he published 2017 a paper called Darwinizing Gaia. It's too late now. Why this religious attitude in the early 80s against Gaia? Gaia was a hypothesis, it wasn't a theory, fine. He wanted to criticize it, fine. But it wasn't criticism. It was much worse than criticism. It was basically like the establishment going full weight against a new idea. We have been experiencing this a little bit on the biotic pump story. The Gaia was much worse, because we lost 40 years in the process. No, the continental drift you mentioned, it was 70 years, 80 years. I totally agree with you. We no longer have time for this. Anastasia Makarieva, my colleague from St. Petersburg in Russia, she ends this piece in Science. She was quoted mentioning Max Planck, saying, "Science evolves one funeral at a time." Which basically means people have to die for the status quo sort of lose the grip on the establishment or the established ideas, and then the new ideas have a chance to progress. This is wrong. This is wrong. We can no longer afford to lose decades. I'm not for everybody accept any new idea like that, but we have so many arguments, so many substance like we had in Gaia. Gaia was a fantastic theory back then when it was only a hypothesis. And then these religious neo-Darwinists came in and blocked Gaia and made it a bad name. It's no longer a bad name now, but we lost 40 years. And we cannot afford to go on like that. We should be striving for truth. That's I agree, but not with religious and Pharisaic attitudes, like throwing on the garbage some idea because it's not your idea. You know, this is bad. This is bad thinking. This is self-criticism. I'm making a self-criticism to our enterprise, science. We have this problem. We behave sometimes like religion. Yeah. And this throwing out a new theory that they could not understand back then. Now for Dolittle is understand, accepting, but too late now.
I think you're right, Antonio. I think each of us on the webinar, you know, we need to cultivate our Gaian consciousness. It's the only way it's going to happen is individual by individual by individual, spreading really fast in the way it happens in complexity theory. You know, there's one little disturbance and the whole system can change. It happens with the weather, as you know very well, Antonio. One little shake of a butterfly's wing, in a sense. So I think each of us, I would hope that we go away from this webinar and we make a commitment to continue to cultivate our Gaian imagination, make a commitment to that development of ourselves psychologically so that we can really begin to perceive Gaia. That's the best thing we can do as individuals. And then from each of us, maybe it'll spread and spread and spread. This is what we've been doing at Schumacher College for the last 30 years. And I think it's had some impact on the planet, not much, but some. So I think, like Jung said, the individual is the most important. You know, we have to feel that this experience of Gaian consciousness that can come upon us as individuals is really precious. It's the sacred jewel in our existence. And we matter as individuals. We mustn't let ourselves be anonymized by Western culture into just digits in some mobile phone or a computer. We're individuals. We're individual Gaians. And I can't see any other way. Each of us, if we want to, can join in this quest. And I can only speak from my own experience. Boy, does it bring you the most wonderful riches. You know, for example, here in England, it's raining today. If I can step into my Gaian consciousness, I can really enjoy the sound of that rain. And I can feel how that rain is part of the whole planet. My consciousness can spread to a sensitivity to the whole planet. Right here, from where I am now, I can feel all the continents and the oceans and the mountains and the forests. And I can feel Gaia as she needs to be, as a sort of great whole integral being. That's where these sorts of practices can lead you, into Gaian consciousness. And I think to do that, just to finish, we need a mixture of science and psyche. So as Antonio said, we don't throw away the thinking, but the thinking now becomes in service to this deeper aspect, our soulful connection with Gaia. That's the primary thing. And the intellect needs to help that to develop.
One question or one line of questions. One is about using the machine metaphor, you know, hardware, software, if there's some way of getting beyond that binary. And then there's another question, which is about, you know, Gaia will survive beyond humans. And so why are we worried? So I wondered if we can sort of pack up this conversation on those two questions.
May I just add a little point to that? There is, in fact, because of the pandemic, a certain fatalistic and almost cynical thinking which is evolving, which says that after all this is affecting the human species, just one species. That's not as simple as that, because humans are leaving behind an amazingly complex debris of their existence on this planet. We must actually have a more intelligent way out of this. Thinking of nuclear weapons, nuclear systems, new military systems, oil and gas infrastructure, the way we have built our cities. I mean, we can go on that.
Yeah, we're not just affecting ourselves. We're affecting the whole biosphere. Millions and millions and millions of species are being taken down by us and pushed into extinction alongside what's happening to us. So it's not just us; it's the whole planet that's experiencing a burning and a heating and a dissolution and a falling apart. Not just humans. We're not separate from nature, of course. You know, what happens to us happens to the planet, and vice versa. About the interaction between life and the planet.
Antonio?
I was thinking here about the two things. One should stop and think, what is the meaning of existence? Now, it's the oldest philosophical musing of all time. Why we are here? Who are we? What conscience is? You know, you get so many people dedicated in trying to explain conscience. At the same time, even if you don't care about those things, those issues, those questions, fundamental question. When you look to Gaia from the perspective of evolutionary Gaia, and you look into what it took in terms of time, energy, complexity, building, eons of interactions, so that we can be sitting, breathing, eating, our hearts are beating and we are talking and we are exchanging. We have now a network of 200 people or 300 people participating in this webinar, and then so many more watching in Facebook. What is behind this? Is it purposeless? As picking on a provocation of Stefan shortly ago, is it out of purpose? If we consider this, we can understand why there are so many religions in the world. There is a need for a meaning, for understanding. And this is where we touch on transcendence. We see that, for example, scientists exploring the frontiers in cosmology and in quantum physics, they're touching on the outer edge of this bubble of our consciousness as a civilization, and try to poke it and say, what is in the other side? What is happening there? And then you go to Indian philosophies and they talk about the other side. Many religions talk about the other side. I'm not particularly religious. I have a spiritual view on life and I try to be integrative. But those questions are very, very meaningful for us to answer. So when you answer them, and you might discover that there is a cosmic ecology of sorts, right? That is not only us here on this rocky planet living in this Gaia environment or Gaia pellicle, like Bruno Latour mentions. It's more than that, much more. There is a meaning for us to be here, this conscience, this software. There is a meaning for software. Software is not random, it's not stochastic, happening in your computer out of nowhere. There is a meaning, there is a connection. And this connection is the search for each one of us, I understand, for each one. Maybe the animals don't get this way, it's not conscious or aware pursuit, but they live their lives fully. And we don't. We segregated from nature and we lost this connection. And the connection to meaning, which is responding this question, what if Gaia will continue? Why should I care? No, I see this in the Brazilians that are now plundering in the Amazon. They say, oh, I'm going to get rich and I don't care for the rest. And this is the same sort of thinking that's incredibly damaging and dangerous, to think that you don't care, because then you really accept this dogma that nothing exists besides our own perception of what exists. And as we have been proven wrong many times over, there are so many things beyond the individual. There are so many things. There are even too many things inside the individual that the individual is not aware of, right? So this is why I think it's incredibly important. I won't try to respond the question in terms of what is beyond, because I have my own view on transcendence. This is not the subject of our discussion today here. But I would suggest that people try to find what is beyond each one. Although it's like an obligation to be alive and to have the capacity to formulate the question, that you go after the answer. Each one go after the answer. There are many, many, it's rich landscape of answers around us. And the other question was about the software versus hardware, the machine, this comparison. I have been doing this, and I have Suprabha watching me right in front of my face, like if we were going back 6 years. She was very disturbed when I made this comparison and say, no, there is an animistic essence in nature, much more than the reduction to machines. But I was telling her back then that my daughter, she grew up inside this apartment, and she can handle a cellular phone much better than I can. But every time a buzzing, bug comes by, flying, she's scared, because the new generations lost the touch with this animistic entity that lies and lives and thrives in nature. In order for them to realize the importance, we need to build bridges. That's why I propose this machine and hardware, software connection, because they know what this is. This is where I can go where they are and then start building. And this has happened to me many times. When I look into the microscope or in the eyes from the Hubble Space Telescope or of a satellite gaze upon Earth, I get to a point that it saturates my capacity of wonder inside my brain. And then I start crying because that's my hope, that when people realize what the machinery is hidden in life, they will saturate completely their intellect, and they will turn off, like shut down the intellect, and then wake up the heart and start a cognition in a deeper level that the angels have had all along from the beginning, and they have not lost it. We have to reacquire those. And microscopes, telescopes, and computers, etc., can help us in shutting off the overpowering and machista intellect that we have nurtured so much.
Yeah, there's a great book I'm reading right now by a friend of mine called The Secret Teachings of Plants by Stephen Harrod Buhner, which I would recommend. Stephen Harrod Buhner, I would recommend to everyone to read, because he actually helps you to cultivate this perception, this Gaian perception, in relation to plants in an extremely effective way. Really, really good. I mean, he's got one whole chapter on sensing, then another chapter on the heart. I'm reading that now, Feeling with the Heart. This is about page 155. Really good. So there are so many things that can help us. That book can help us, for example. Antonio mentioned yoga in India, of course, and your own Indian spirituality is very, very pro-Gaian. I mean, even the word Gaia comes from India, from the Gayatri mantra, right? There's a connection there between India and Greece, I think, in that word Gaia, probably. And we've mentioned before, we need to, if we want to heal Gaia, we as a humanity, every individual, we need to embark on a journey towards Gaia. We need to find Gaia for ourselves and see how she reveals herself to us as individuals. We need to make a move towards her. Most people won't do it. Most people won't even know what we're talking about. It doesn't matter. Like the Bhagavad Gita says, I think, you just do the action because you feel it's right, before you feel it's good for you, good for the universe, and don't be attached to the outcome of the action. I think that's very helpful wisdom from India. That means I can cultivate my Gaian consciousness right here where I am now in rainy England. I stop complaining about the weather and I just notice, hey, look how the color of those clouds, and I wonder how far they go. I mean, they're covering the whole of Western Europe, and then they're reflecting heat on the upper surfaces, keeping the planet cool. And then suddenly my consciousness begins to become more Gaian. I start to get a sense of the whole planet, and how where I am right now, breathing the air right here, is part of this great Gaian organism in which I'm deeply immersed. And the Gaia then becomes my second body, as my friend David Abraham would say. We have two bodies. One is our Gaian body, our planet is our body, and then we have our little physical body within our larger body. That's a very interesting idea, that we're endosymbiotic within our own body. These are sorts of ideas that trigger Gaian imagination, And those of us who do teaching and writing about Gaia, we're trying to find ways of evoking a Gaian imagination in ourselves. So I guess I'm just repeating what Antonio has been saying, which is we need to find a path to Gaia, to our Gaian consciousness. It's lying there deep in our heart. Gaian consciousness is the core of our heart, is the Gaian consciousness. Our happiness will come from when we discover our Gaian consciousness. And so that's our task as a human being. That's the task. We should probably wrap up, should we, or not?
Yeah, we should actually wrap up.
It's been going on for an amazing time has just gone by, and it could go on. So I think I would like to invite Leo to bring it all together. And if anyone would like to pursue this with either of you or with the community that we have created today, you can write to the email address that I've put there, or to the emails on our websites, and we will pass them on to Stefan and Antonio. Leo.
Yeah, thank you, Suprabha. And thank you so much, Stefan, and thank you so much, Antonio. It's been an incredible insight into our existence through these rather depressing times. I mean, I can see the enthusiasm that people are still joining in, and I'm still admitting, even as we are wrapping up. But that I think these are the kind of conversations that we need to have almost everywhere and almost every day. And we must change the language of this world, because the language of this world has become so frightening. Much as I agree with you, Antonio, that yoga is an amazing, or Stefan, that yoga is an amazing thing to do every day. Our Prime Minister also does yoga every day, and he also brought the International Yoga Day to our existence with the United Nations help. But he's also good friends with Bolsonaro and with Donald Trump. So I have my doubts about the impact of yoga sometimes when I look at these three men. But that said, I think for most others, yoga, I mean, we have all sorts of spiritual gurus who use yoga for all sorts of divisive and strategies. But that apart, I think by and large, yoga in its true sense is uplifting of the soul. So it's also about getting the technique right and understanding what the technique is for. It is to unite, not divide. It is to bring love and peace, and not a sense of fulfillment from gratification and aggregation, right? So that seems to be the kind of pulse to which the world is now beating, thanks to all the financial institutions that we have created and political formations that there are, and the whole idea of the nation state itself, which is so fragmenting of the very idea of Gaia. But we live in the construct that we now do. But to have these conversations actually helps us to imagine a world beyond this kind of rather limiting construct that we have created for ourselves. So thank you really very, very much for agreeing to share your thoughts and views, and also spending time with all of us. We had more than 170, 80 people when we, for most part of the conversation. I checked on Facebook and we seem to have at about 100 people there already watching this. I want to share that this is being archived, it's being recorded, and it will be up on, it's going to be up on Facebook anyway right away on the ESG India group page. It will also be up on ESG India's YouTube channel, and also ESG India's website, and probably also on Gurukula Botanical Sanctuary's website when they can pull it together. So on that note, I really, really thank you all for a wonderful time together. It has been amazing that we connected as Gaia would want us to, using technology appropriately. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have a nice day.
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you very much.
Antonio.
Bye-bye.
We hope to see you in this part of the country, especially south of India.
Thank
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Lovely to be with you. Bye, Antonio. Bye, Supi.
Bye.
Bye, Stefan. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Leo.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.